Earlier this week, fighting erupted in the Somali capital, Mogadishu, between government forces and opposition groups. The violence marked the culmination of a long-running dispute over electoral reform that has flared intermittently since at least 2012. So in this video, we're going to explain why violence is once again engulfing Mogadishu, and why this spat comes at a particularly bad time, given al-Shabaab's growing influence in the region. Anxieties about material self-sufficiency, a turn towards protectionism, great powers asserting their spheres of influence, this all looks suspiciously similar to the build-up to the First World War. In the latest issue of our magazine, we explore the remarkable parallels between now and then, and ask whether we can avoid a third one. That's just one of 80 pages in the magazine, because there's more in Too Long than you'd expect. Purchase your copy by clicking the link in the description. So, to understand this story, you need to know a bit about Somalia's rather funky political system. In short, after the ousting of longtime dictator Siad Barre in 1990, Somalia was consumed by a furious civil war. As the civil war started to calm down in the latter half of the 90s, it quickly became apparent that Somalia needed some sort of political settlement capable of holding the various clan-based factions together, but lacked the state capacity or institutional infrastructure for a fully fledged democracy. So, as a sort of middle ground, in 2000, Somalia adopted what's become known as the 4.5 system, where political representation was split evenly between the four main clans in Somalia, namely the Darude, the Dir, the Hawiye, and the Rahanweyn, with the remaining minority clans collectively getting half as much representation as one of the main clans. It's slightly more complicated than this in practice, but the basic idea is that each of the four main clans get 22.2% of seats in the Somalian parliament, and the remaining 11% or so go to the minority clans. MPs are chosen by elders from the clans, which still play a central role in Somalian politics and society, and then sent to the national parliament, where they elect the president. The 4.5 system was originally imagined as a sort of temporary stopgap, and the Provisional Constitution of 2012, specifically Chapter 4, which nominally guarantees universal suffrage, was supposed to bring an end to it. But this didn't happen, because the various clans and stakeholders couldn't agree on a new system. This was partly for cynical reasons. MPs elected under the 4.5 system had little incentive to change the electoral system, and certain clans, especially the smaller of the four main ones, worried they'd end up with less seats if they moved towards a classic one-person, one-vote system. But there were also legitimate worries at play. Defenders of the 4.5 system argue that it prevents any single clan from dominating, and that Somalia's democratic institutions are not yet strong enough to substitute for clan politics as a source of political legitimacy. Although its opponents would probably argue that the 4.5 system has entrenched clan politics and stunted the development of Somalia's other institutions. Anyway, this argument has played out many times since, and is essentially the root cause of the recent outbreak of violence. In short, Somalia's current president, Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, who was elected in 2022, is trying to move towards a one-person, one-vote system, but much of the opposition disagrees with his proposed reforms. To be fair to Mohamud, this was always the plan. When he was first elected in 2022, Mohamud immediately announced that the next elections would be conducted by universal suffrage, and originally it looked like this might actually happen. In May 2023, for instance, his government announced that it had come to an agreement with Somalia's regional governments, known as federal member states, to move towards universal suffrage, with regional elections due for June 2024 and national elections for November 2024. However, as negotiations got into the nitty-gritty, some of the more powerful federal member states soured on the idea, accusing Mohamud of trying to essentially centralise power. This triggered a constitutional crisis in 2024, when the federal parliament approved the electoral reforms via constitutional amendments, prompting Puntland and Jubaland to suspend relations with the federal government. With no agreement forthcoming, the government was unable to schedule fresh national elections, although they were able to organise municipal elections in Mogadishu in December of last year, Somalia's first one-person, one-vote elections since 1969. This gave way to another constitutional crisis earlier this year. This crisis sort of began in March, when Mohamud and the federal parliament passed another bunch of constitutional amendments that, among other things, extended the president's term from 4 to 5 years. At the time, it wasn't clear whether this would apply to Mohamud, given he was elected in 2022, when terms were 4 years. In May, however, just before his 4-year term would have ended, but with no election scheduled, Mohammed announced that the constitutional amendments did in fact apply to him, and that he would thus stay in post for an extra year. Unsurprisingly, this didn't go down well with the opposition, including representatives from the federal member states, but also a group in Mogadishu led by former President Sharif Sheikh Ahmed and former Prime Minister Mohammed Ali Khair, who said they no longer recognised Mohammed as president. This all came to a head earlier this week, when the opposition organised anti-government protests in Mogadishu for Thursday. It's not 100% clear who started it, but what seems to have happened is that Mohammed sent federal troops to raid Ali Khair's house on Wednesday, the day before the protest, while Ali Khair was in a meeting with other clan elders. This is a pretty big deal. An attack on clan elders is generally considered a provocation against the clan as a whole, obliging a reaction from the rest of the clan. Interestingly, the US made a similar mistake during their intervention in Somalia in 1993. US forces raided a meeting of clan leaders in somewhere called Abdi House, killing a number of important clan leaders and turning many Somalis, who might have previously supported the American campaign against warlord Mohammed Farah Aidid, against the US. Anyway, Wednesday's raid quickly spiralled out into a shootout between government and opposition forces, inviting some of the worst violence the capital has seen in years. It's possible that things will have calmed down by the time this video comes out, but the basic disagreement over the precise contours of electoral reform will persist, as it has for over a decade now. Furthermore, this latest episode has eroded whatever trust was left between Mohammed and the opposition, who already saw Mohammed as essentially an aspiring autocrat, making a sustainable agreement even less likely, and further violence thus more likely. This all comes at a particularly bad time for Somalia as a whole, given that Al-Shabaab, an affiliate of Al-Qaeda, has recently been tightening its grip on the country. Al-Shabaab have long exercised de facto control over vast swathes of rural territory in south and central Somalia, but have recently taken steps to put more pressure on Mogadishu, which is basically the only area the federal government actually controls. If the government in Mogadishu is unable to stem the infighting, this will leave Mogadishu precariously vulnerable to either a siege or, in the worst case scenario, an outright attempt on the capital. The latest issue of our magazine is out now, and if you want our best value ever, subscribing and using code SUMMER26 gets you your first copy for as cheap as £4.99, as well as 20% off as long as you stay subscribed. I told you about one of the articles at the start of this video, but this issue's truly jam-packed with content from all around the world. Obviously, the headline section is our rundown of Trump's wars around the world, discussing all of the different countries and regions which have faced Trump's military wrath, going nation by nation through the timeline, and reaching the ultimate question, has Trump created the modern holy war? From there, we dive into our regional sections, starting with the UK, where we unpack the results of the recent elections, take a look at the UK's odd foreign posture, and discuss if Britain has become ungovernable. Then, in the EU section, we discuss how Russia's sphere of influence is fading, why Europe's energy transition isn't what you expect, as well as looking at the Euro's missing members. Finally, in the global section, we discuss if we're seeing echoes of the First World War, what's next for Iran, as well as what really came from the Gen Z protests we saw emerging last year. That's not even everything. With this 80-page issue, our joint longest ever, there's even more to read than I've even been able to mention here. So click the link in the description to learn more and grab your copy today.